This is Eric Berg's Final Word. I'm Eric Berg, and today I have my guest Chris Conrad here. Mr. Conrad has worked with me on medical marijuana cases and other marijuana cases for probably 20 years. I defend people charged with marijuana misdemeanors and felonies, and Chris has helped me keep them out of jail and prison and keep them free for the last 20 years. Chris is an expert in all things related to marijuana, and he has special knowledge of Prop 64, which is on the ballot November the 8th. And we're going to be discussing that in a minute. But before we get started, Chris, I'd just like to know if you could just tell us kind of a little bit about yourself and how you got into this whole marijuana thing to begin with.
Well, I've been a political activist for my entire adult life. In fact, when I was not an adult, I was actually organized a group to stop the Ku Klux Klan in Maryland. Then I was in the civil rights movement, the peace movement, etc. Worked my way through the anti-nuclear movement, the anti-intervention movement, public housing, affordable housing, issue after issue. It was finally in 1988 that I turned my attention to the marijuana issue. One of the things that interested me in it is that everybody I knew said those laws need to change, and they said it was impossible to change the laws. And so I took that as a challenge.
Now, let me just interrupt you. For people that don't really know this, there was a time not too many years ago that for one joint you could go to prison for years. Isn't that true?
That's correct. In fact, I have a friend who is a Californian who was busted in the 1950s. He got 1 year for joints. Per joint, he had 3 joints, 3 years in prison.
And there are people even now serving 10, 20 years in prison for growing some flowers.
In the federal court, yes. State court, I think it's usually capped at 3 years.
Right. So do you know about people that are serving long prison sentence in federal prison for growing marijuana?
I certainly do. Well, the first person who comes to mind is Eddie Lepp over in Lake County. He was arrested for 36,000 marijuana plants for a medical marijuana garden, and he got sentenced to 10 years in prison. They actually offered him a deal that he could walk away with the probation if he admitted what he was doing was wrong, and Eddie said, it's not wrong to provide medicine to sick people, so therefore he refused the deal. And people have mixed feelings of whether that was a good idea or not. I probably would have taken it, but I totally respect him for doing what he did.
So how did you get started being an activist in the marijuana world?
Well, mostly my interest at that time was I was mostly involved in the environmental movement, and so I was looking for a crop that would help save our farms, help reduce pollution, help stop deforestation, reduce global warming. I know at the time very few people were concerned about global warming. I was one of the first people out there on that issue. And so when I did my research into the marijuana issue, I just learned about industrial hemp, and it just tied the whole thing together to me in ways that I hadn't ever conceived of before. I mean, I knew that hemp was used for something, you know, for making paper or something like that, but I didn't know that it was the world's primary industrial resource for 10,000 years. I didn't find that out until I read the Senate hearings when they did the Marijuana Tax Act in 1937, and then I read the Department of Agriculture reports before that, and it turns out the Department of Agriculture was advocating for restoring industrial hemp at the beginning of the 20th century because it had dropped to an economic low of use. And then just as the machinery was invented to make hemp back into the powerhouse that it has been throughout the rest of history, all of a sudden the word marijuana enters the lexicon. They're talking about Mexicans and this crazy new drug, and then they pass this bill through the Senate and the Congress in just a matter of days without even being read by most of the members of Congress who voted on it. And so that really got me upset, especially when I found out that growing hemp sustainably can produce 4 times as much fiber per acre as cutting down natural forests. And now with modern forestry, tree farms, is now 3 times as much per acre by growing hemp. But nonetheless, the fact that we've just deforested our country, and we could have just had our farmers growing hemp all that time, and we would have saved our farms and saved our forests, and instead of that, our country decided to create a drug war. So that brings me to the social justice issue that we were just talking about. A friend of mine had been in prison for 3 years for 3 joints and things like that. And so I felt it was time to just take the bull by the horns. This is what I said to people. I said, there's no place left to retreat. This is at the end of the Reagan administration. We had all the horrible federal penalties, the conspiracy laws, mandatory minimum sentences, property seizures, things like that. And so then George Bush came in and he said, well, you guys don't think we can arrest all you guys? Well, we'll create more prisons and hire more prosecutors, and we're going to take you all down. So I said to my friends, I said, there's nowhere left for us to run at this point. It's time to dig in and fight back. And so I took the policy of give them no quarter. We fought on the conservative arguments, the environmental arguments, the agricultural arguments, the economic arguments, the social justice arguments. Anywhere that they wanted to fight, we took them on. And after I formed the Business Alliance for Commerce and Hemp with 4 specific goals: restore industrial hemp, make medical marijuana available with the doctor's oversight, legalize people to grow and possess marijuana for their own personal use and share it with their friends, and to create a regulated adult market for marijuana with an age of consent. And at the time I thought 18 was the age of consent, but since then we've realized that the public is not ready for 18-year-olds to have marijuana. So most people are talking about 21 at this point.
You've written some books about marijuana. Tell me about those.
Well, first I collaborated with Jack Herer on his book, The Emperor Wears No Clothes, which I designed and edited. Then I wrote my first book, Hemp, Lifeline to the Future. Then I was working on my second book, Hemp for Health, and at that time the Medical Marijuana Initiative, Prop 215, headed toward the ballot. So I stopped writing my book and jumped on to trying to get Prop 215 passed. My wife and I were the coordinators of the grassroots part.
Prop 215 is the Compassionate Use Act that is part of our Constitution in California now. What does Prop 215 say?
Prop 215 says that patients who have a doctor's approval can cultivate and possess marijuana. They can have one caregiver to do that with them if that person is primarily responsible for the health, housing, or safety of the patient, and that a doctor should not be penalized for recommending medical marijuana. So basically created a legal defense. I mean, it sounds like that it legalized marijuana, but in fact, the patient has to go to court to prove that they have the doctor's note, that the amount is reasonable, et cetera, that the person really is their caregiver. So even though it kind of legalized marijuana, it's set up in a situation where you mostly end up in court, and that's how I met you, in fact, right there.
It is. In fact, I'm still going to court even now after Prop 215's been the law for 20 years.
Yeah, 20
exactly
years,
20 years.
2,500 cases I've worked on since it was
Right.
passed. And we thought we had legalized marijuana at the time.
Right, and these people have recommendations. The doctors say they can grow so many plants. They're growing what the doctors say they can grow, and they're still prosecuted for felonies and facing prison.
Exactly. And then the legislature came along in 2003 with Senate Bill 420. That created a defense for collectives. It created a state ID card program, which is voluntary, and it set what we called safe harbor. It was originally supposed to be 6 pounds of marijuana and 200 square feet, but the day before it went to the legislature to vote on it, law enforcement got them to reduce that to 8 ounces of marijuana and 6 mature or 12 immature plants. So at the beginning of the day when I walked in there, I reread the bill and they had changed it. So I was lobbying against it in the morning. And then we talked to the sponsor and we said, why did you do this? And he said, this is my last time. I'm not going to reintroduce it. So we spent the afternoon going to the same legislature saying, look, go ahead and pass it because we need the collective defense. The quantity was not as important. And again, in retrospect, having patients have 8 ounces is better than having every patient have to fight over every gram.
So what is the collective defense that the SB 420 gave us under California law?
It says that patients can provide to one another and that they will have defense that they have a defense in court for cultivation, possession, transportation, even sales of marijuana, and having a place where marijuana is possessed or sold. Right.
So basically it says that any patients that get together or associate with other patients to grow marijuana or to share it with one another will be immune from at least conviction of these laws.
Yeah, although I've seen people convicted anyway, typically people of color, that the juries tend to think that the white guy holding 10 bags of marijuana is okay, he needs those 10 bags, but the black guy holding those 10 bags, he must be selling it. And it's an unfortunate thing in our society. And that's one of the things about Prop 64 is it really tries to solve some of those disparities as well.
Well, so now,
but one thing we should need to say about SB 420 is that the legislature last year passed the Medical Cannabis Safety and Regulation Act, and that eliminates that defense starting in 2019.
Right. So for the last 20 years, SB 420 that allowed these collectives to get together and people to get together to grow together, that law that allowed them to do that is going to be totally eliminated and replaced by by what we call MRSA, which, what does that mean again?
Well, it's actually MCRSA, Medical Cannabis Regulation and Safety Act. Since they passed the bill, they've repassed it with a different name.
Okay.
And I think it has to do with what a sloppy job the legislature did writing the bill, personally. I'm not impressed with it.
Right. So you're not in favor of that bill, and one of the reasons is that they did away with the collective defense.
Right. I don't have a problem with the fact that it allows for local and state regulation of businesses. I don't have a problem with that at all. It's the fact that they took away the collective defense, and it also said that local governments can ban patients from growing their own medical marijuana. That's what I don't like about it.
Okay, so under the MRSA laws, the local governments would be allowed to ban patients from growing their own.
Right.
Right.
Now, they would still be able to use the Prop 215 defense that it's their own personal use and that they had to have that much because of their medical need, but they won't be able to say, oh, I was growing for another patient. There's 5 of us patients growing together. That's going to be gone.
Right. So the collective defense, the defense that we're getting together to do it together, that would be out the window.
Yeah, some people call it the Craigslist defense. You go on Craigslist and you say, 215 patients, I will sell you medical marijuana. Come 2019, that's a ticket to prison.
Okay. Let's talk about Proposition 64. What does Proposition 64 say?
Well, basically it does 6 things. The first thing it does is it legalizes small amounts of marijuana and cultivation, and that includes an ounce of bud, or 8 grams, and 8 grams of concentrate per adult, and then up to 6 plants per household.
So an ounce of bud and 8 grams of concentrate. So concentrate might mean hashish, or
could be oil, could be
wax, butter.
Right.
Any of those things.
Correct.
Or any combination of those things.
And so you won't need a doctor's approval. It creates it as a right. The legislature can never take this right away again. To do those things, to transport it for your own use, and to share it, to give it away, your entire harvest. So if you grow 6 plants and you get 6 pounds out of that, you would still be able to have that 6 pounds in your house.
Now, I think you were telling me that it also prevents the police from tossing your car and searching your car and arresting you just because they think that you have an ounce of pot in your car, or that they see a couple plants in your backyard.
Right. A lot of people don't realize that the medical marijuana laws are such that if a law enforcement officer comes up to your car and he smells marijuana, he can say, I don't believe it's medical, I don't believe it's a reasonable amount, and then they can search your entire vehicle. Under this initiative, if you have...
Prop 64 we're talking about.
Prop 64, exactly. And I'm with Friends of Prop 64, that what it does is that it says that if you have that 1 ounce, if you have that 8 grams, if you have those 6 plants, that the officer has to walk away and leave you alone. They can't search you. They could ask you if they can search, and so this is something where attorneys like yourself always tell people never consent to that search. So one of the things after this passes, we have to make sure people understand. Otherwise, the cops will just say, "Can I search your car?" and they'll search it, but they won't have a legal right to do that. And what's most important about that, from my perspective, is that it tends to be people of color. Poor people, homeless people. These are the people that law enforcement are searching. A businessman, somebody with a suit and tie, they're not likely to harass me, but they do tend to harass people of color.
What if they have a friend support chronic farmers t-shirt on?
Again, unfortunately, I think that they racially profile, so I think...
They still leave me alone, you think?
Yeah, you would probably still be left alone, but if you were 20 years younger and a person of color, I think you might have more of a risk there. And then, we have this epidemic of police shootings right now. Over and over again, what it starts off as a cop starts harassing a person about something, and then the person starts arguing back at the cop, and then the next thing you know, this person is shot. And so I really think this is huge in the social justice issue, because it's not just about that. It's about possessing that marijuana. It's about the police not harassing people. It's about them not having that incident that leads to an arrest, that leads to a shooting. If we can stop that from happening by this law, which I believe we will, that's going to be huge to the inner cities and people of color around the country, because I think what happens here is going to spread around the rest of the country.
Now, you say you're part of Friends of Prop 64. What is that?
Well, there's the official campaign, which is yeson64.org. Then there's the group Drug Policy Action, which is connected to the Drug Policy Alliance, and their website is legalizeca2016.org. This is the group that have helped to fund Prop 215, and so forth. They're another major funder, and they gave my wife and me a little grant to be able to come up to Chico to talk to you guys and things like that. But they're very limited of what they can do. We want it to be more open, so we have an open membership thing, Friends of Prop 64, where we're just encouraging people in the community to come forward, help us to spread the word, help explain all the misinformation that's going on right now.
So there are people, in your opinion, that are putting out misinformation or maybe outright lies about this initiative. Can you tell me what some of those are?
Well, one of the more onerous ones is they claim that Monsanto is behind this, and I know absolutely that's not true. They say that Monsanto is paying me. That is not true. I would know it if they were, believe me. Then they say that it creates additional penalties. Says people say it creates new felonies. That's not true at all. People say that it favors big business over small businesses. That is really not true. This initiative has been very specifically designed to bring people who are in the current illicit market above ground. That's the goal of this. It's called the Restorative Justice Initiative, and when we get to talk about that more, I'd like to do that. Some of the things they say are true, though. They say that, well, if you have more than an ounce, it's going to be a misdemeanor. That's true. It wasn't my choice.
If you have more than an ounce, it's going to be what?
A misdemeanor.
Well, right now, if you have more than an ounce, it's a misdemeanor.
It is a misdemeanor, exactly.
So
you got that exactly right.
So that doesn't change anything.
Right, and they felt it should have, some people feel they should have eliminated all the penalties on marijuana, eliminated all the taxes, eliminated all the regulations, create what I call anarchy, where it's like we just trust each other to be good people and it all works out. But that's not the way this initiative is written. This initiative is written to protect children, to protect the highway safety, to protect the consumers of marijuana. It has to be lab tested, it has to be labeled carefully, and the businesses, people who have a criminal record for growing marijuana will be able to get into the industry. Even people who get in trouble for selling other drugs can get into the industry, but people who are involved with fraud and embezzlement, sex crimes, they're not going to be allowed into the industry.
Well, one of the things that we did another show about this initiative a few weeks back, and my guests at that time said that this new initiative, Prop 64, would do away with the protections of Proposition 215. And have you heard that said about this initiative?
Yeah, I've heard that said. It's absolutely not true. The first thing is that nowhere in it does it even mention Prop 215, except for 5 times it says that this initiative shall not change the Compassionate Use Act, Health and Safety Code 11362.5, which is Prop 215.
Right. So all the rights that patients would have under Proposition 215 in the Constitution to grow for their own medicinal use, if they have a doctor's recommendation, or to grow as a caregiver to someone else, all those rights would still be in effect and wouldn't be affected by Proposition 64.
That is exactly correct.
All right.
But now it adds some new protections, like CPS can no longer take away children from people who are medical marijuana patients. The privacy, more privacy protections for patients. There's even a part that they added that says if your doctor screws up your recommendation, that you're still safe. And I don't know if you've been in court cases where they try to say, well, the doctor's recommendation is the doctor didn't do a good.
Well, sure. They try to undermine the doctor. The doctor isn't a real doctor because he only charged $100. He has a lot of different patients.
Right.
He doesn't know what he's doing. They try to say like it's not really the real thing.
Yeah, and well, under this initiative, though, that would do him no good at all. The judge would say, well, according to this, it doesn't matter. If the doctor made a mistake, the patient is not responsible for that.
But the main thing, the main reason that you're in favor of Proposition 64, can you tell us what that is?
It's the social justice aspect. It's the fact that it legalizes marijuana. It makes it so the legislature can never make it illegal again. It reduces penalties across the board. It makes it so there's no more jail for minors under the age of 18 for going, which right now you can get a felony under the age of 18 and spend 3 years in prison. That's no longer going to be a risk. It clears people's records. It's retroactive, so people who for the past 40 years have gotten arrested will be able to get their criminal records reduced or eliminated. The benefit
So
of
if somebody has a felony conviction for cultivation or possession for sale from 10, 20, 30 years ago, they could come to court and get that basically expunged from the record, eliminated
Well,
from the
the
record.
intent to sell would still be a misdemeanor.
Okay.
The cultivation could
But
be
the
a felony.
felony conviction would be
Correct.
eliminated. They could say they never had a felony conviction.
That's correct.
Right.
And the other thing is that the benefit of the doubt goes to the person who comes to get the record cleared. Law enforcement could oppose it. So say, for example, you go and you say, Your Honor, I have this 10-year-old conviction for 11-358 cultivation of marijuana. That's legal now. So the judge is supposed to say, okay, that's legal. Now, on the same time, the prosecutor can come and say, wait a second, that was 5,000 marijuana plants and he was selling it to people around the neighborhood, and then the judge can say, well, in that case, it's a misdemeanor.
Okay, so the judge could either say it's completely off your record or say it's a misdemeanor.
Right.
But the judge wouldn't have any other choice.
Right, and then the prosecutor would have to come in and challenge you, which we don't think the prosecution is going to spend a lot of time doing that. Yeah.
You know, I'm sure that you realize this is a huge social justice issue, but most states, including the state of California, completely marginalize people that have felony convictions, and it makes it very difficult for them to live normal lives, to support their families, to have the freedoms the rest of us enjoy. Mm-hmm. And I think that is going to make a huge difference to a lot of people.
It certainly is, and as I would say, they won't be able to search people. It's got a lot of stuff to protect the small businesses. It's got a whole section on anti-monopoly and anti-price fixing and anti-redlining regulations, so that make sure that big corporations don't jump in there and just dominate the industry, beer or the winery model.
So you think that this new initiative is going to open up the law to allow kind of a craft beer business in California for craft pot?
Exactly. Well, we call it boutique marijuana or gourmet marijuana, but yeah, that will be something. And I know a lot of the small growers, one of the things they're concerned about is some big growers get in there, they can bring the price down, and then it's going to be hard for people to get by. But if you look at like the wine model, you can go and buy $2 Chuck, but that didn't put all the wineries in Napa County out of business. And that's another thing, since I mentioned Napa County, is it has appellation rights, meaning that if you are in Mendocino County, you can call it Mendocino marijuana. But if you're in Fresno, you can't do that. So I think that like Humboldt County, Trinity County, even Shasta, Tehama, they have reputations for good quality marijuana. So these counties are going to be able to actually benefit from that and not have their names ripped off.
What you said, I think that there were concerns about safety or this initiative. Tell me what was done to make sure that that safety was still a consideration.
Okay, well the first thing is what they did not do. What we saw in Washington State was they made a 5 nanogram per milliliter in the blood as a driving under the influence, and they could ticket you, take your license away for doing that. We know that doesn't work for 2 reasons. The first off, people who use marijuana regularly often always have that much or more in their bloodstream. And
even if they haven't used it for a week or
right.
a couple weeks.
Yeah, and the other thing is that it doesn't show whether you're impaired or not. In fact, AAA, the American Automobile Association, just did a report this past month that said that it's no good to do that. And it was good timing because this California legislature was trying to sneak a per se DUI through the legislature before the initiative passed. But then when AAA came out and said that doesn't work, that took the wind out of the sails.
So the state of Washington had a per se stoned driving law that said if you have more than 5 nanograms of THC in your blood, you were guilty of that.
Exactly.
And
this initiative has nothing at all like that. It
right.
says there it creates a $3 million a year fund to have research done that's going to determine how can you gauge impairment, not only from marijuana but from anything else, like people with prescription drugs and things like that, that also could impair them. And then the other thing that it does is it gives extra funds for law enforcement to get impaired drivers off the road. Again, not marijuana impaired drivers. This is not targeting marijuana consumers, but they don't consider it abuse anymore.
Well, let me ask you this. So Prop 64, what has it done to make sure that our communities are still safe?
Well, it has a lot of protections for children, first off. Child-proof packaging, no advertising to minors, no like characters like Camel, Joe Camel sort of characters, so those are not allowed to be used. The packaging is not allowed to be enticing to children. They have to be clearly marked. You have to be age 21 or above to go into the stores to buy it in the first place. So all of those things are part of the protections of children. The next thing is with the roads, that they're taking steps to make sure that our roads are safe by this impairment testing rather than just some per se thing that we should know doesn't work. The next thing is there's a lot of environmental protections. Damaging the watersheds, things like that are still serious crimes, even if you're doing it with marijuana. And so there's that whole issue.
So what does Prop 64 say or do to address possible environmental degradation or contamination by pot growing?
Well, first off, whereas we mentioned that it's a misdemeanor to cultivate marijuana, if you cultivate marijuana and you're also destroying a watershed, then they could be charged as a felony. It's not mandatory because it has to do with how severe the damage is. But so there's that penalty. The other side of it is that all these licenses that we have, if you are selling to children, if you're screwing up the environment, you lose your license. And so anybody who's interested in making money doing this, they jeopardize their ability to do that if they cause any of those kind of problems.
So Prop 64 would allow cities and counties to license people to grow larger amounts than 6 or 12 plants, up to a half an acre?
Yes.
And they could do so commercially?
Okay, so then so they would have to be kept 600 feet from a school, but otherwise there's no limit on the number of licenses. They just have to be kind of kept small. They can't overcrowd certain areas. They can't betray certain parts of the state, meaning that they can't redline it, make it where some communities have easy access and other ones don't.
But the cities and counties would be the local governments that would determine, in other words, if the city of Chico wanted to completely outlaw marijuana, they couldn't outlaw 6 plants, but they could outlaw more than that?
Well, the law doesn't necessarily allow for more than 6 plants unless you have a doctor's license approval, and then you could still have your Prop 215 defense.
Right.
So, but they can ban commercial activity, but they can't ban people from growing their own marijuana or sharing their marijuana.
But Prop 64 would allow the cities and counties to allow and license commercial growing up to a half an acre if they wanted to.
Correct, and on-site consumption as well, which is a big issue.
So you could have little coffee shops like in Amsterdam.
Exactly right.
All right. And
there's a lot to this initiative. It's 62 pages long. So
okay. So that's why you're saying that this could turn into sort of like a brew pub kind of atmosphere.
Right. This what we call the micro business license. It would allow you to cultivate, process, retail, wholesale, and have on-site consumption at one location.
Well, Mr. Conrad, I'm going to have the last word here, but why don't you wrap things up before we wrap things up?
Okay, sure. As I mentioned, it legalizes, gives people a right to cultivate and possess marijuana and share it with their friends. It creates a privilege for businesses to operate as long as they follow the certain rules. It protects the environment and it protects children and highways. It legalizes industrial hemp by taking away the requirement for a federal license, as is now required under California law, so that people can do that. And it creates a regulated system with taxes. Those taxes are to be used for very specific things. It's not just a general fund. It's for cleaning up the environment, for protecting our highways, for helping young people stay out of trouble and keeping them in school. And there's a fund to help communities that have been harmed by the drug war to recover from the damage. That's why we call it restorative justice. People who have records will be able to get back into the industry and people get their lives back together, and this initiative helps them with the tax money that the consumers pay.
So you say vote yes on Prop 64.
I absolutely say yes on Prop 64.
And let me say, that I think that in my earlier show I was convinced of one thing, which I don't think is true after you and I have talked and after I've talked to other people, and that is that Prop 64 would do away with the protections of Prop 215 and would make it so that medicinal users of marijuana would no longer be able to enjoy their constitutional rights to do so. And you've convinced me that that's not true. In fact, this Prop 64 would respect and keep in effect all the protections of Proposition 215. I think this will be a huge step towards fairness in the law and will be great for our communities and our culture in California. So I say vote yes on Prop 64.
And I do too.